into a brand new hour of CBS Sports HQ presented by Geico. Just 4 days to go. The national championship game. It's Michigan on one side, J.J. McCarthy, and Washington, the Heisman runner-up Michael Penix Jr. on the other side. It is the 1 seed versus the 2 seed. For the 4th time in CFP history, who is going to win it all? Is it going to be the Huskies or is it going to be the Wolverines? And we're going to keep talking about it for these next 4 days. We got the whole squad on deck. I'm Jacqueline D'Agostino alongside Haley Sutton, Lige Duzable, and Danny Cannell joining us. And guys, for the first time since 2014 in almost a decade, we are not talking about the SEC. Man. And I know that makes DK happy more than anybody. Isn't that right, Danny?
I'm very depressed about that. I'm sure there won't be any snarky tweets whatsoever.
There hasn't already been any snarky tweets.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what hurts, Haley and Jacqueline and Lige? That the ACC isn't there, so it doesn't feel the same. And some people, the Big Ten fans, are claiming this is 2 Big Ten teams with Washington make that move next year. I don't really care about all that. All I know is we have a phenomenal matchup, which is what I'm most excited about.
Yes, let's get into the matchup, and we're going to talk about Michigan to kick things off. This is a team that finally wins a bowl game with Harbaugh. It seemed like it had been forever. They get over the hump. They win the Rose Bowl, and they're looking to win a national title now for the first time since 1997. Lige, this is a team that has been trained to beat the C.J. Strouds, the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, the Chris Olaves. Now they're finally at this point. Is that experience going to kind of give them a leg up, in your opinion?
Jacqueline, you would hope so, and you talked about all the things they've done in the Big Ten, but the question about them, and you alluded to it, they've struggled in bowl games. I mean, 0-6 with Harbaugh. They finally get over the hump by beating Bama last week, and you would hope all that experience with J.J. McCarthy going to the college football playoff and Blake Corum, even though he was hurt, the experience he's had while at Michigan, and them losing in the college football playoffs the last 2 years, you would hope that that gives them a leg up because they've been there, done that. Now it's all about finishing the job. And when you look at this team, right, stingy defense. They gave up just over 10 points per game, only 150 pass yards through the air allowed per game. J.J. McCarthy and this offense, they want to run the football. They average around 160 yards on the ground. So that'll be the thing in this game, right? The Michigan physicality versus, if you want to say, the finesse of the Washington Huskies than the way they throw the ball around the field.
Yeah, this team has been knocking on the door of getting this national championship. Deuce, you mentioned it, back-to-back Big Ten champs. And I really felt like, these things do come in stages. Like, you have to kind of beat your rival in Ohio State. That was something Jim Harbaugh was 0 for 5 against when he took the Michigan job. Then he did that, and it was like, okay, then you have to win the Big Ten. They do that back-to-back years. Then it's, what do you do at the next level? And the first year against Georgia in the Orange Bowl, when they got beat 34-3, it was like, they're not ready for prime time, so they kind of go back to the drawing board. Then last year, they get there. They get beat by TCU, even though they were the better team and they were the favorite. J.J. McCarthy made a couple mistakes, a couple pick sixes. They came back almost enough, but it was too short. And so they got there, felt more comfortable, just didn't play their best game. Now, and you also heard Jim Harbaugh talking about the preparation for the Rose Bowl. Preparation was a little bit different, keeping his players fresher, not going as hard in practice. And that experience in the postseason and dealing with a month off, I think has really helped Michigan. And I think the mental mindset of, okay, we've been there enough times already. We know what it takes. I think that's been incredibly beneficial for the Wolverines.
Yeah, something else that may or may not have been beneficial this season was all the sign-stealing drama that happened within the Wolverines program. But even more interesting than that, let's talk about J.J. McCarthy's comments about the sign-stealing. This is what he had to say after the game, quote, "I'd say a good number, 80% of teams in college football steal signs." He went on to say that Ohio State was stealing Michigan signs. It was legal, so they had to do what they could to make it, quote, an even playing field. So, Danny, I'll go to you first on this one. You hear your starting quarterback making these comments after they've been told pretty much all season not really to focus on it. What do you make of J.J. McCarthy?
Haley, first of all, I am shocked that J.J. McCarthy spoke on this. It's a really easy no comment. Hey, we're not talking about that anymore. We'll let the investigation run its course. Just you avoid the subject. I'll say for us, it's refreshingly honest that we get a look behind the glass here and we can see what they're thinking. But I think this is very much sticking to the Michigan script, which all along has been everybody's been doing this. Now, that doesn't change the fact that you were the ones that got caught. And I would say I disagree with him on 2 points. One, he says 80%. I would say it's more like 100%.
Exactly.
But you are in that 1% that has been doing it to this extent, which is
Correct.
why they're finding themselves in such hot water. He also tried to say later in the same interview that they dissect certain plays. They spend 10 to 15 minutes, looking for tells, looking for tendencies. And he said that's basically sign stealing. I could not disagree more with J.J. McCarthy on that. So I think he's basically following the Michigan script, which all along has been everybody's doing it. We just got caught, which I don't think is a fair defense.
At all, DK. And my question is, what was the purpose of doing this now?
Right.
A couple days before you're playing the biggest game of your career. You're playing in the national championship game. You talked about it, DK. Who's doing the media training for Michigan? Because he could have just sideswiped this question and been like, that's something in our past. We want to move forward. We're just focused on playing the Washington Huskies. And it's just crazy. And you alluded to it. He talked about 80% of teams do it. So the reason why you guys got in trouble is because the extent at which you did it, right? It's not that everybody doesn't do it. We know everybody sign steals and everybody scouts. That's actually legal, but it was the extent that Michigan did it, and I just don't understand what the purpose of J.J. McCarthy bringing this up in front of the nation just days before the national championship game. You should be focused on Washington, should not be talking about this anymore.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, my papers keep going all over the place. Danny, I wanted to get to that quote that you mentioned. He said, I just feel like it sucks. We do work our butts off. We do watch so much film and look for those tendencies, and we spend 10 to 15 minutes. He went on to say that there's a lot more that goes into play than just the sign stealing. So it's certainly been an interesting topic this week.
Very much
Yeah,
so.
and you guys alluded to it's certainly easier to look ahead to the game. That's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about Michael Penix and Washington. We were just talking about his throw off camera. He's a lefty. He makes it look real pretty. Lige, I will start with you. How does this Michigan secondary, or can they, handle Michael Penix and this pass attack?
Jacqueline, good luck. When you look at Michael Penix Jr., to me, he solidified himself as a first-round pick. Matter of fact, I'll double down. He solidified himself as a top 15 pick. DK, this is the best deep thrower in college football. You talk about manipulating the pocket presence, being able to process extremely well. And then the biggest thing when I was looking at this Washington-Texas game before it, I wanted to preview to see how this Texas secondary would hold up against that three-headed monster that Washington has. And honestly, the Texas secondary did a good job, but when you're throwing with the accuracy that Michael Penix Jr. is throwing with, there's nothing you can do as a defensive back. I mean, that fade route down the left sideline to Roma Duze, where it hit him right on the shoulder pad, that's perfect coverage. There's nothing he can do about that. Or when he split the safeties to McMillan in the middle with an absolute flamethrower for a touchdown. Or the 7 route to Jalen Polk, where he puts it where only Polk can catch it. Not only that, but he put it where he can catch it and then run after the catch. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. is playing at a different level right now. Again, there's nobody that's a better deep ball thrower in college football. And if the medical clears out, he should be a top 15 pick in this year's draft.
There you hit on it. And I think that combine, the medical evaluations are probably going to be the most critical, because if you watch the game tape, he's phenomenal. I mean, stretches the field vertically as good as anybody. You mentioned the deep ball. He threads the needle with arm strength as good as anybody, and he processes information and executes the system as good as anybody in the country. And you mentioned a couple of his weapons. He's got 3 phenomenal receivers on the outside. Roma Dunze, who might be the best receiver in the country, Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk. So you combine that with a system that Kalen DeBoer has drawn up, really exploits a lot of your weaknesses. It really does make for a phenomenal matchup. But my favorite thing about the Michael Penix journey is it hasn't been 5-star quarterback going to Alabama or Ohio State or one of the top tier countries and it's smooth sailing and it's 3 years and you're done. Started his career at Indiana, and I was there. I was covering a game with CBS Sports, calling a game against Indiana against Ball State. And I remember talking to a young offensive coordinator named Kalen DeBoer, and the quarterback wasn't decided yet. It was week 1, and we thought it was going to be one guy. Said, hey, we might get our true freshman in there with some action. He's this kid named Michael Penix. And he raved about his work ethic and the raw talent. And going all the way back to then, you saw that Kalen DeBoer saw something in Michael Penix. And I think it's such a great story that Michael Penix, after going through some adversity, some injuries at Indiana, then his play doesn't, pan out. He reunites with Kalen DeBoer, a coach who believes in him, builds a system around him, and they've come to this spot for a chance to play for a national title. It's a great story of overcoming adversity, perseverance, toughness. I love it for Michael Penix.
Yeah, you just gave me goosebumps there, Jamie, just taking us back in history a little bit, but it just goes to show you how important coaching is with these guys as well. So it'll be interesting to see him out on the field. Let's talk X factors in this game, though, between this matchup. It feels like it's an explosive offense taking on a stonewall of a defense. Lee-J, you gave us two X factors in this one, doing a little extra credit here. So I'll start with you. Give us your X factors for this matchup.
Yeah, I went one on each side, Haley. We'll start with the Washington Huskies, and I'm going on the defensive side with their corner, Jabbar Muhammad, to me, is their best cover corner. If you look at last week versus Alabama, Michigan, Roman Wilson had a big day on third down. Well, if you look at it, the best cover corner, Jabbar Muhammad, may travel with him. I know he had a couple PBUs versus Oregon when he shadowed Troy Franklin. So that's one of my X factors, right? When Washington is able to get Michigan in 3rd and 7 and 3rd and 8 situations, right? J.J. McCarthy did a really good job hitting those crossers last week. So Muhammad is going to be big for them. And then I went with the quarterback from Michigan, J.J. McCarthy, but not for the reason you're thinking, right? I'm talking about his mobility. If you look at this Washington defense, they've struggled really against mobile quarterbacks, right? We saw Quinn Ewers have a couple scrambles. He rushed for over 50 yards. We saw Bo Nix in the Pac-12 championship game rush for almost 70 yards. We saw J.J. McCarthy, when they needed him the most versus Alabama on that last drive to tie the game up, 16-yard scamper. I'm looking for J.J. McCarthy to pick up some first downs with his legs, using that mobility. He's my X factor for the Michigan Wolverines, not because of his arm talent, but because of his mobility.
Look at Dews trying to make me look bad going with you guys. I'm gonna go with 3. All right, I'm going with 3, and it's all the same position. I'm gonna kind of cheat a little bit because I'm gonna throw them in there. I'm gonna go with Washington's running backs. Not only Dylan Johnson, but also his backups, Tybo Rogers and Will Nixon, the guys who have been splitting carries behind him, because we got the injury status of Dylan Johnson the other day. It said that the x-rays came back negative. And I think Washington is planning to play coy a little bit, because we watched that look on his face right there when Dylan Johnson was on the field, helped off. It looked bad. I'm going to go with what I saw with my own eyes. I'll be surprised if Dylan Johnson is at full strength. And as much as we've talked about how great the Washington offensive line is, Dylan Johnson has been outstanding in blitz pickups and in pass protection. That's the one where if Dylan Johnson can't go, Michigan is going to bring pressure. They're going to try to confuse him. And part of confusing the quarterback is confusing the guys that protect him. I trust the offensive line, but if you start seeing depth issues and other running backs on the field that aren't Dylan Johnson, I think that's an area that could be a big concern for the Washington Huskies.
And guys, there's a lot of talent, a lot of playmakers on both teams. We're going to talk about first touchdown scorers, and we're going to talk about, of course, Blake Corum, DK, who is just a rushing touchdown machine. And you like that bet.
Yeah, Jack, I usually try to go a little deeper and find a long shot, and I try to get too cute. Now, I'm just going with the workhorse, Blake Corum. I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis for Michigan, is to ride the guy that brought them this far. And J.J. McCarthy has been awesome, but Blake Corum, to me, is the true identity of this team. And with an offensive line that really answered the question, what would they be like without Zach Zinter, after they've kind of manipulated it, moved some guys around, there didn't look like there was much drop-off against Alabama, and he came up with a couple big runs in that one. I think early in the game, they try to establish the line of scrimmage. If they get down the red zone, I think they give it to Blake Corum as that bell cow. So I'll go with Blake Corum. Even though the odds aren't great, I still think it's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, that was a chancy bet right there, DK. I'm actually going to go with the guy you just talked about a little while ago, Dylan Johnson. Now, I know that injury looked ugly, but if you look at it in the fourth quarter, when they needed some gutty yards, Dylan Johnson was in the game, and I think he's going to do everything possible to get into this game. DK, we talked about how explosive this Washington Husky offense is with the three-headed monster at receiver, but Dylan Johnson has brought a grittiness to this team, especially in the low red zone, right? 16 rushing touchdowns. I like him when they get in the low red zone, because I believe they will be able to drive the ball on the stingy Michigan defense. Dylan Johnson will be the first touchdown scorer in this game.
All right, we're going to talk player props here next for Michigan. I got a little distracted, Lige, because you were ragging on Danny for picking Blake Corum in our last segment, but I got it right here that your top player prop for Michigan is Blake Corum. I will give you the benefit of the doubt because the last time Washington and Michigan played was back in 2021. It was a 31-10 win in favor of Michigan, in which Blake Corum went 171 for 3 rushing touchdowns ever. So it makes sense while you're taking Michigan in that prop bet, but just kind of lay it out for us why that's a good move.
Well, I had to give Danny some gruff because I knew that pick was coming down the pipe, right? And you talked about it, Haley. The last time these two teams played, he went off, right? 3 rushing touchdowns. And if you look at what he's done this year, Haley, he scored a touchdown in every game they've had. 14 straight. Matter of fact, he has 25 rushing touchdowns this year. So if you look at this Washington team, we saw the Texas running backs last week have success. Both of their running backs scored a touchdown. You go back to the Oregon State game, right? Their lead running back had 2 rushing touchdowns. So I like Blake Corum and the physicalness of this Michigan team when they do get in that low red zone to score. That's why I like him for anytime touchdown. Didn't like him as much for first time touchdown because I think Washington will score first, but I like him for anytime touchdown.
I mean, you talk about going on a lead minus 360. Holy cow. Talk about a score thing. I do agree with you. I just don't like the price.
Yeah.
All right. I flipped it to his backup, Donovan Edwards. His rushing total is only at 25.5 yards, something he's done 7 times this season, not against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, but in the previous 4 games before that, he's gone, he's had at least 25, 26 yards rushing to hit this over. I think the biggest concern for me, shout out to Tom Fornelli for giving me this stat. Washington's run defense is 130th in the country in rushing success rate. They are very weak against the run. I think either one of these running backs, I would probably take a dive and say, you know what? Blake Corum over 96 yards, 96.5. Donovan Edwards over 25.5. I think they could both go over that rushing total. But since Donovan Edwards a little bit lower, feels a little bit safer, I'll take his because I do think Michigan will run the ball effectively.
All right, let's talk about Washington player props. We'll see if you guys are playing it safe. We're going to go a little bit more out on a limb. Lige, what you got for us?
I like that both of our picks. I think we both kind of went out on a limb when you look at this Michigan defense. I talked about it earlier, right? They only give up 150 pass yards per game, so that will be a matchup to watch. I went with not the receiver everybody thinks I'm going to go with. I went with Jalen Polk. To me, he's their shiftiest receiver. He's a guy that has outside and inside flexibility to play in that slot, and he's their best run after catch. DK, when I saw this number, I was astounded. 53.5. Jalen Polk has hit this number in every game except for 2, and in one of those 2 games, he hit the 52-yard mark. So I like him to go over the 53.5 receiving mark. It looks like Rome Odunze probably will get some more attention. So Jalen Polk potentially could be in one-on-one situations. Went over 100 yards last week versus Texas. I like him to go over 53.5 yards receiving.
All right, dudes, now I'm getting a little bit nervous because we're both going over some totals. Now I think is what Vegas loves because everybody wants to see, over high, fireworks on the offensive side of the ball. I went with Rome Odunze. You see the number and it's under 100 yards at 94.5. He's gone over at least 100 yards in 10 of 14 games, including the last 5 in a row. He's one of the best receivers in the country. I think he gets it, but I am nervous. You look at the Michigan defense, how good it is. But I think even if Washington, their only way I think they're going to move the football is through the air. So I do think Michael Penix will eventually figure it out and they'll get those yardage. So I'm going Rome Odunze over that 94.5 yards as well. Both of us on some Washington receivers. But again, I think that's their only way they're going to be able to move the ball effectively is through the air. So we'll both go with some Washington receivers.
You guys still have a little time. Jacqueline said it off the top. There's still 4 days left. So if you feel convicted to change your opinion, Danny, you can. Let's talk about getting an early lean on this game. Michigan, once again, the favorite at -4.5. The total sitting at 55.5. Danny, I'll let you get final word here. What's the play for you?
Haley, I don't think I'm going to waver much, no matter what news comes out, barring an injury to J.J. McCarthy in practice or something with Blake Corum. I just think Michigan is the better team, so I'm going to lay them. I'm going to lay the 4.5 points with the Wolverines. We've talked a lot about the matchups, and I do think the key matchup of the game is Washington's offensive line. Can they protect Michael Penix? I think it could be a struggle. I think they impact him, but the bigger disparity to me is Michigan's run game. We talked about this in some of our props. I think they're able to establish the run against Washington's defense, which most importantly, yes, it's offense, but it's also a form of defense to be able to keep the ball out of Michael Penix's hands. Remember the Penn State game, second half, you saw Michigan run 30 times in a row. I think you could see a similar game plan if they get up 10 points, 14 points. They lean on them, play keep away. So I'm going to roll with the Wolverines -4.5 and the under for kind of all the same reasons. I do think there's a correlation. If you like Michigan, lower scoring, so I'll take the under as well.
Well, DK, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm going with the boy from Tampa. That's right, I'm from Tampa. Michael Penix Jr. in Washington. And I'm going with the trends, right? If you look at what Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix Jr. have done, when they're the underdog, they are 5-0 straight up. So not only are they covering, they're outright winning games, right? And then if you look at them versus Big Ten opponents, they are 2-0. Matter of fact, Michael Penix Jr. beat Michigan when he was at Indiana. Then if you look at Michigan, they are 2-11 in their last 13 games against the Pac-12. I believe the Washington Huskies not only win this, they cover the game, but they also win it outright. Matter of fact, give me Washington Huskies on the money line. I don't even want the points.
Y'all felt Lige put a little bit more bass in his voice when he said that. Oh, guys, we love it so much. 20 minutes of incredible conversation as we continue to count down to the college football playoff game. It's happening, the national championship. And for more on that upcoming matchup, you can tune into the Cover 3 podcast by scanning that QR code on your screen. A new episode just dropped as they talked about the transfer portal, the quarterbacks that are still in there, the wrap-up of bowl season, and like I mentioned, the national championship game kicking off on Monday.